In this episode, we begin with a topic that can sound abstract until you realize it sits underneath many of the technology, security, and risk decisions an organization makes every day. Enterprise architecture is not just a collection of technical diagrams or a set of meetings for senior staff. It is the larger view of how the business works through systems, data, processes, people, and supporting technology so that important decisions do not get made in isolation. For someone studying certified in Risk and Information Systems Control, see CRISC, this matters because risk becomes much harder to understand when the organization cannot clearly see how its parts fit together. A beginner should think of enterprise architecture, EA, as the disciplined effort to understand the shape of the organization's technology environment and to guide that environment so it supports business goals, security needs, operational stability, and future change instead of becoming a collection of disconnected systems that are expensive to run and difficult to govern. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. At its core, EA is about structure and alignment. It helps the organization answer questions such as what business capabilities matter most, which systems support those capabilities, how data moves across the environment, where key dependencies exist, and what standards should guide future technology decisions. Without that larger view, technology choices often happen one project at a time, with each team solving its own immediate problem while creating bigger complexity for the organization later. Over time, that leads to overlapping tools, conflicting processes, unclear ownership, fragile integrations, and security obligations that are difficult to manage consistently. For a beginner, the easiest way to understand the value of EA is to compare two cities. One city grows with a plan for roads, utilities, zoning, and future expansion, while the other grows through random construction wherever space appears. Both may function for a while, but the planned city is far easier to maintain, protect, expand, and govern. EA plays a similar role inside modern organizations. The word principles in this topic is especially important because principles are not the same as detailed rules, exact procedures, or specific products. Principles are broader guiding ideas that help leaders and teams make better choices consistently over time. A principle might say that data should be entered once and reused responsibly rather than recreated across many systems, or that critical services should be designed for resilience instead of assuming failure will never happen. These statements are not detailed step-by-step instructions, but they still shape important decisions. For beginners, this is a useful distinction because it shows that EA principles are meant to guide direction, not replace every local decision with a giant rulebook. Strong principles make it easier for the organization to decide whether a new system, project, process, or vendor choice fits the larger model it is trying to build. They give teams shared logic for decision-making instead of leaving every technology choice to short-term convenience or personal preference. One of the most important EA principles is business alignment. Technology exists to support business goals, not to become a separate world with its own disconnected logic. That means architecture decisions should begin with business capabilities, important services, customer needs, legal obligations, and operational priorities rather than starting only with what a technical team finds interesting or familiar. If a system supports a critical revenue process, a regulated activity, or a service customers depend on every day, that should influence how the system is designed, supported, secured, and integrated with the rest of the environment. For a beginner, this principle matters because it prevents a very common mistake. Organizations sometimes invest heavily in technology that looks modern or impressive without checking whether it truly supports the most important business outcomes. EA pushes leaders to ask what the organization is trying to achieve first, and then to shape systems, data flows, and operating models around that purpose so technology decisions remain grounded in real business value. Another major principle is standardization, which helps reduce unnecessary variation across the environment. Standardization does not mean every system must be identical or that innovation should be blocked whenever a team wants something new. It means the organization should avoid needless complexity by using common patterns, shared approaches, and repeatable designs where those choices make the environment easier to support, secure, and govern. If every team uses a different access model, a different integration style, and a different way of storing or naming critical data, the organization becomes harder to manage and more vulnerable to mistakes. For beginners, standardization is best understood as a way of reducing chaos. It helps make training easier, operations more consistent, security stronger, and troubleshooting faster because people are not constantly dealing with 20 unrelated ways of solving the same basic problem. Good EA principles encourage enough consistency to create stability without forcing the organization into rigidity where no sensible variation is allowed. Integration is another core EA principle because organizations rarely operate through a single system. Business processes usually cross multiple applications, teams, and data sources, which means architecture must pay attention to how those pieces connect. If integration is poorly designed, the organization may face duplicate data, delayed updates, manual workarounds, conflicting records, and confusion about which system holds the most trusted version of important information. That kind of disorder affects not only efficiency, but also risk, reporting quality, customer experience, and incident response. For a beginner, it helps to think of integration as the quality of the conversation between systems. If systems cannot exchange information clearly and reliably, the business ends up paying for the silence through delay and error. A strong architectural principle in this area usually emphasizes controlled, understood, and well-governed connections rather than random point-to-point arrangements built quickly during projects and forgotten afterward. Integration done well creates visibility and consistency. Integration done poorly creates technical debt and operational uncertainty that grow quietly until they become very expensive. Closely related to integration is the principle of data stewardship and clarity. Data is one of the most valuable assets most organizations have, but its value depends heavily on whether the organization knows what data matters, where it lives, who owns it, how it is used, and how its quality is maintained. EA principles often emphasize that data should be treated as a shared organizational resource rather than as private property controlled differently by every system or team. That does not mean all data should be open to everyone. It means the organization needs clear ownership, consistent definitions, reliable handling, and responsible movement of data across processes and technologies. For beginners, this principle matters because many business and security failures begin with confusion over data rather than dramatic technical breakdown. If teams cannot agree on what a customer record is, where the current version exists, or how sensitive data is classified and shared, then architecture is already weak at a foundational level. Good EA helps create shared trust in data, which supports reporting, control design, compliance, and business decision-making. Another essential principle is modularity, which means designing systems and services so that the environment can change without requiring everything to be rebuilt at once. A tightly tangled environment may function, but it often becomes brittle because one change breaks many other things. A more modular environment creates clearer boundaries between systems, functions, and services so improvements can be made with less disruption and less hidden risk. For beginners, modularity can be understood through a simple comparison. A machine built so every part is welded into one giant structure may be powerful, but repairing or upgrading it becomes painful. A machine built with replaceable components is easier to maintain and improve over time. In EA, modularity helps the organization manage change, modernize older components gradually, and reduce the spread of failure from one area to another. This principle becomes especially important in fast-moving business environments where new services, new partnerships, and new regulatory demands require technology to adapt without constant crisis and uncontrolled rework. Scalability and adaptability are also important architectural principles because organizations rarely stay exactly the same size, shape, or operating model for long. They grow, merge, reorganize, enter new markets, change service models, and adopt new technology patterns, which means architecture has to support change without becoming unstable every time demand or business direction shifts. A system or design that works only under today's conditions may become a bottleneck tomorrow if it cannot support higher volume, wider use, or more complex processes. For a beginner, this principle is about building with the future in mind without pretending you can predict every detail of that future. Good EA does not lock the organization into one narrow version of itself. It creates enough flexibility that growth, restructuring, and innovation can happen with more control and less panic. This matters for CRISC because architectures that cannot adapt well often push organizations into rushed exceptions, fragile quick fixes, and technical sprawl whenever business needs change faster than the environment can support. Security and resilience are also architectural concerns, not just operational concerns handled after design is complete. A weak architectural principle is to assume that business systems can be built first and protected later. A stronger principle is to recognize that access, segmentation, recoverability, logging, dependency awareness, and data protection are all easier to support when the architecture itself reflects those needs. If security is treated only as an add-on, the organization often ends up layering controls onto a confusing environment where ownership is unclear and important trust boundaries were never designed well in the first place. For beginners, this is a very important lesson. Architecture shapes what is possible later. A resilient environment usually reflects principles that value controlled change, visibility, recoverability, and clear separation of responsibilities. A fragile environment often reflects years of decisions that ignored those needs until a disruption or breach made the weakness impossible to ignore. EA principles help move security and resilience earlier in the decision process, where they can influence structure instead of chasing it afterward. Governance is another foundational principle because architecture does not improve merely by producing diagrams or preferred future state ideas. The organization needs a way to review decisions, manage exceptions, balance local needs against enterprise consistency, and decide who has the authority to approve change when trade-offs are involved. Without governance, architectural principles become suggestions that teams ignore whenever deadlines grow tight or budgets become uncomfortable. For a beginner, governance is what turns EA from a conceptual exercise into a management capability. It creates the forums, ownership, standards, and review paths that help the organization apply its principles in real decisions. Good governance does not mean a slow committee blocks every action. It means important choices are evaluated with enough structure that short-term convenience does not quietly create long-term instability. The goal is not control for its own sake. The goal is to help the organization make technology decisions in a way that preserves alignment, reduces avoidable complexity, and keeps the overall environment supportable and understandable. A very practical EA principle is understanding current state and target state clearly enough to guide movement between them. The current state is how the environment actually works today, including legacy systems, workarounds, dependencies, and constraints. The target state is the more intentional future arrangement the organization wants to reach because it better supports the business, risk posture, and operating model. Many architectural failures occur when leaders talk only about the future without honestly understanding the present. For beginners, this principle matters because improvement requires a real starting point. If the current environment is misunderstood, the roadmap built on top of that misunderstanding will likely be unrealistic or incomplete. Strong EA does not pretend the current state is cleaner than it is. It documents the reality, including weak spots and complexity, and then uses principles to guide which changes should happen first, which legacy elements must be managed carefully, and how progress can be made without destabilizing critical operations in the name of modernization. Trade-off awareness is another principle worth understanding because architecture decisions are rarely perfect. Organizations constantly balance speed against standardization, innovation against stability, local team needs against enterprise consistency, and cost against resilience. EA principles help make those trade-offs visible and deliberate instead of accidental. For example, choosing a new specialized tool may help one department move faster, but it may also add support burden, data fragmentation, and security review complexity across the broader enterprise. Choosing a common platform may improve long-term consistency, but it may also require more near-term effort or process change. For a beginner, this principle is helpful because it shows that architecture is not about forcing every decision into a single ideal answer. It is about making trade-offs consciously, with awareness of how a local choice affects the broader environment. Mature architecture work does not eliminate tension. It helps the organization handle tension intelligently so decisions remain connected to long-term business and risk goals rather than drifting into isolated convenience. A simple example can make these principles easier to picture. Imagine a healthcare organization growing through acquisitions. Each acquired clinic brings its own patient systems, billing tools, support processes, and access methods. Without strong EA principles, the organization may end up with duplicate records, inconsistent identity management, unclear ownership of critical data, weak recovery capability, and different security practices across sites that are all supposed to serve one larger mission. With stronger architectural principles, leaders would first define the business capabilities that matter most, identify trusted data sources, standardize essential patterns where appropriate, design cleaner integration, clarify governance, and build a roadmap from current state toward a more unified target state. The organization might still need time to get there, but the direction would be clearer and the risk of uncontrolled sprawl would be lower. For beginners, this example shows that EA is not an abstract decoration. It is the logic that helps a complex organization grow, adapt, and protect itself without becoming unmanageable as its technology footprint expands. As we close, the main lesson is that enterprise architecture principles help organizations create technology environments that are aligned, understandable, supportable, and resilient enough to serve real business needs over time. They guide how systems, data, integration, governance, security, and future change should be approached so that individual choices strengthen the whole environment instead of slowly breaking it apart. CRISC expects you to see that risk becomes harder to manage when architecture is fragmented, opaque, or driven only by short-term convenience. It becomes easier to manage when principles create shared direction and better decision-making across the enterprise. For a new learner, that is the heart of this topic. EA principles are not there to make technology look organized on paper. They are there to help the organization build and govern an environment where business priorities, operational discipline, and security responsibilities can actually work together in a stable and sensible way.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.